it's fascinating as it intersects with homeschool because one of the draws is people are like, well, we get to customize this education for this child. Well, that's great. And if you have one or two, it's not realistic for a big family. And so I turn it around. What's the education sometimes that works best for mom is actually the most important thing, because if mom's happy, I think there's proverbs about that or something.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this is another edition of Homeschool Talks, where I get to talk to interesting people in the homeschooling world. Today, I'm very delighted to welcome our guest, Lauren Gideon. She's the Director of Public Relations and Affairs at Classical Conversations and is also a homeschool mom. So we're happy to have you on the podcast today, Lauren.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate all you and HSLDA has done for the homeschool community. So just excited and delighted to be here.
Well, we are glad to have you too. So big, very specific question that I like to ask guests is, tell us about yourself.
Okay. Yes, big. So right now, I presently am homeschooling 7 children. My oldest is a senior this year. I've been homeschooling him since he was born. So 18 years ago, he just turned 18 this past week. So it was a big milestone. Let's see. I myself, like you said, was homeschooled through 7th grade, actually, and then I graduated from a private school. It is through homeschooling, I feel like, that I have kind of developed my passions and my hobbies. And one is history. I love all things history, American history. So one of those passions is I co-lead a community organization where we teach founding documents and walk through the principles and the applications for modern context. So I could go on, but that's the gist of it.
Well, what was your homeschooling experience like up through 7th grade?
So back then it seemed like more the minority of people that were homeschooling. And so one thing as I reflect back on my experience is that my parents took what was an abnormal thing and made it very normal for our family. And so that's something that I really appreciate now as I interact with families that have never homeschooled before and they're overcoming all of those like social obstacles and conversations. Is I never had to do that because my parents did that for me. But back when they were homeschooling, there wasn't as many options. There seemed like a couple models that you picked from. And the culture and just the setting was such that I feel like there was a lot of pressure on homeschoolers to feel like they were competing with a traditional model, a traditional setting. So a lot of the way the homeschool materials were set up was much like having a school at your home. And so it wasn't like that every day, but a lot of the way that we kind of walked through our core subjects was much like a private school would. So I enjoyed it. There's a lot of value that I gained from that. I think there's a universal skill set that all homeschoolers have is they know how to read the directions and then problem solve and figure out what's expected of them. And so that was a valuable skill set me and my siblings, I thought, or any homeschooler gained through that experience. But it also, just the experience helped me learn and grow in what I was looking for as a homeschool parent then.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I was the oldest of 4. And so I have a lot of sympathy for firstborns who are the guinea pigs. But I affirm that to my oldest as well, that nobody knows what we're doing. We just make this up as we go. So it was me, then a brother, then a sister, and then another brother.
And were they all similarly homeschooled through 7th grade? Or
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the year which I think my mom kind of hit a wall where in her confidence level that she felt like her ability as a teacher and the content, she felt like she hit her threshold, and then suited our family best to then move into that private school setting.
Mm-hmm. So how did you become a homeschool mom yourself?
Well, I was a young mom, which is a whole different story. But my oldest was born when I was 19. And so there's a couple reasons, I think, as a formerly homeschool student, I don't think I set out to be a homeschool parent, but that's, again, what was normal to me. And so as I approached that school age, that 5-year, as I'm taking inventory of my options, we're young families, not a lot of money. So that rules out private school. And I was fairly confident I did not want to do the public school route. So that left one option. And then the other part of me, since I was a young mom, me and my firstborn, I felt as though we were growing up together. And so I was not about to share that experience with anybody else. And so I was growing as a mom as he was growing as a student. And so we just did everything together.
So you started homeschooling when your oldest was 5, and it all went swimmingly well, perfect right from the get-go because of your background?
Yeah. No.
Yeah? No?
So one thing I found, there's some themes kind of about homeschooling in my generation is I suffered from what I think some people have called workbook burnout. And so my mom was frugal and my mom was thorough. And so we did every side of every workbook and learned a lot that way. But I would have been happy if I never saw another workbook again. So I knew I wanted to homeschool, but I knew I never wanted to see a workbook. So it's such a neat opportunity to be a homeschooler because of the amount of options that are available to homeschool parents. Also, it's kind of the worst time to be alive because of all the options that are available to homeschool parents. So with one student, I had this idea that I wanted to take the unschooling approach in so much as I wanted to curate a customized curriculum around his every interest and idea that he had. And I was going to be ready to academically meet his needs around his interests and skill set, which was fabulous until his sister also turned 5. And I was like, that was a full-time job and I don't have time for 2. So then we went about exploring, unit study-based models, which, again, I loved it. I loved being with my kids, and it was very playful. And I had about the amount of free time that I could prepare a lesson. And then I was done when, all the preparations, I was tired. And then I was too tired to actually teach the lesson. So that was our experience with that. And every year, so my first 4 kids are all 18 months apart. So almost every year we added a grade level to our homeschool. And then when I added my 4th, we decided we're going to do a literature-based curriculum, which I started realizing that the decisions I made it's great when you can customize a path for each individual kid, but also I had to take into account our family dynamics and our family's needs and our family's culture. And so I knew I was looking for something that would bring us closer and together. So that's where the literature curriculum came in. Again, I loved it. It was hard to find that sweet spot, though, where it was engaging to my older children and not too much above my younger children. And it was second semester, and I love to check the boxes. And we're going through the books, and the book at hand was Winnie the Pooh, and we were behind, and I was crying because we were behind. And I was like, this is Winnie the Pooh. So we had a little heart-to-heart with myself. And then actually it was through that experience, I was like, I think we need to pivot again. But this is 4 kids, 4 pivots. And I'm married to a public school graduate who has been super nice and accommodating. But he says, wife, listen here. There's only so many times we're going to pivot here before I'm pulling the plug on this operation. So I knew that. And so this next year, he's like, we can try this new curriculum, classical conversations, but if you don't like it, we're done. And if it doesn't go well, we're done. So there was a lot of high stakes that year, but we fell in love because it was exactly what we needed. The bulk of the curriculum was the same for my young students. So something that pulled us all together. It worked with our family's needs. It engaged my oldest and my youngest, and we all had these good conversations about the kind of content we were learning. And so that was my introduction into classical conversations. And and we've been there for 9 years since.
So what advice do you have for maybe today we're very excited to know that lots of new people have started homeschooling, people who may not have been homeschooled themselves, and maybe before COVID wouldn't have considered homeschooling. You mentioned one of the problems today is not that there aren't enough materials or resources, but it's hard to pick amongst all of the resources that are out there. What advice would you have for somebody just kind of coming in cold to homeschooling without any background?
So I do, just as part of my roles, I've met with a lot of new homeschoolers, and one of the biggest obstacles they feel is their competence. And they're not subject matter experts necessarily, at least not in every field of study. And so the thing that I encourage them with is of all the course material that you could learn about, or the curriculums, we have the internet, we have so much literature and curriculum. You could learn anything about anything if you wanted to. There's only one thing, there's no manual for your child. And you're the subject matter expert on your child and your family. And so, if you're stacking up the comparison between, an expert teaching a specific subject and you can always learn the subject matter that the expert knows, but that expert can never know the subject matter. There's no manual for your child. So you automatically have an advantage just by the mere that it's your child, you love them, and you know them well. So, usually it's overcoming that obstacle. And then my second advice is always to enjoy and to have fun. Kids learn a lot more when they're having fun, and to assume that you won't get it right the first time, and that's okay. I probably have pivoted more than most homeschooling, and each time I learned something. I learned what I didn't want to do in my homeschool, and through that, I kind of curated a vision for what I did want. And that was one of, I think, the hardest once you leave the status quo, like we've let our society define education. And once you realize, there was this moment during COVID that was my favorite. There was a teacher, I think, in somewhere around here. And there's this sentiment that these kids are falling behind on the standards or the benchmarks. And this teacher says, don't you realize we've made these things up anyway? And I thought it was funny because it's like you said, the quiet part out loud. But just to be free from the benchmarks that our society, and then this invitation and opportunity to define what is education, what are my goals for my family, for my children, for myself, and then to be able to reverse engineer that is so liberating and exciting and daunting all at the same time. So to have fun, that's my other part.
So you talked about, your family relationships and family culture. How has your adult homeschooling experience with your 7 children contributed to relationships with your kids and your family culture?
Well, that's a good question.
I try to get at least one good question in every podcast.
That's excellent. No, I like that because I'll have to back up and said, that given the context and the material available, my mother only felt comfortable going through 7th grade. And so it was such a benefit to me to have the confidence to go that far, but then to be able with, I feel like the community and structure and support I got from classical conversations to take what she gave me as a springboard and take it to the next level through high school. And so I didn't get the opportunity to be homeschooled through high school. I had great relationships with my parents, but when we sit down to discuss the Patriot's Guide to U.S. History or what's another good one? Consequences of Ideas or Mere Christianity. I never imagined when you picture ahead like what parenting teenagers is going to be like. This is not at all it's way better than I could have ever imagined. It's interesting, when I got into homeschooling, there's this need for community and support. And so there's a lot of these moms night out at activities, which I love. But not as much as I did when I first started, because my kids are not my friends. And so when we sit down to discuss something, the conversations that we can have, I didn't expect. And so those are a big part of our family culture. And then the beauty of education and conversation is we work out these complex ideas through novels like A Door in the Wall, or Crispin and the Cross of Lead. And so it's like we as a family have visited all these times and places, and what may not even be real places, but together we've vacationed and visited all these places that have become a part of our family culture and the fabric of our family, that have become the best inside jokes anybody could ever ask for. Mm. So.
Mm. Well, I have 7 children also.
Oh.
They're all adults now. And one of the things that Debbie and I have always felt is that because we chose to homeschool them all those years, that our relationships with each of them are stronger than I think they might have been. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's really fun to watch, I mean, we're like any other family, so we have, internal squabbles and all kinds of things like that. But our kids, they're all on each other's teams. I mean, and I think homeschooling helped our family culture that way, in a big way. And one thing I noticed with my 7 children, and you may have noticed this with your 7 children, is they're all different. And it's not, we're not just talking about learning styles or,
right.
So how do you cope with 7 actual individual people who are different from each other and different from yourself?
So they are. And it's just interesting sometimes. And so they're very different, but sometimes you see themes too, right? You're like, well, this one kind of matches with this one on that thing. And so I just think it's fascinating. And they all have their strengths and their other things about them. In my family, we joke that I think this is a theme, that the baby is the favorite, and everybody assumes it, and it's this joke, and we all laugh about it. But one new thing that we have been doing is, you're my favorite for this thing. And so it's interesting with each one of my kids. I love them all, but we bond on a different thing. Like my oldest that's going to graduate, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about philosophy and history and all these deep things. And my second born, you want to know who I want to sit on a beach with and relax and not talk about stressful, deep things? It's her. And so not only are they different, but the way that we relate to each other is different. And if you want something done, you ask the third born, who's actually more of a firstborn, and she's the one that keeps our whole family in line. So, it's fascinating and unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was kind of an early revelation in my parenthood life, was that, these are people that are kind of separate from me. They're not actually extensions of me.
I agree. And it's fascinating as it intersects with homeschool, because one of the draws is people are like, well, we get we get to customize this education for this child. Well, that's great. And if you have 1 or 2, it's not realistic for a big family. And so now I turn it around. Not what's the education sometimes that works best for mom is actually the most important thing, because if mom's happy, I think there's proverbs about that or something.
If there aren't, there ought to be.
There ought to be. There's modern proverbs, at least.
Yeah, that's right. So you entered into homeschooling. What's your husband's name?
Tom.
So after your 5th
yes.
Restart, what do you call it? Not restart. Your 5th
pivot. Yeah, pivot, something like that.
The 5th pivot, which is where you kind of landed.
Yeah.
What's his involvement in your homeschooling? And,
sure. It's like one of the number one questions is, how do we get our dads involved? And so a part of Classical Conversations is we always have these big equipping sessions. And that's one of always like the top questions is, how do we get dads involved? And it wasn't until I asked my husband to come. He was actually our audio visual guy for an event, and he had to listen to these ladies all discuss and some of them in a positive way and some of them less. And he was very like sober about it. And he's like, I want you to know that I'm totally behind you, but I work as hard as I do so that you can do what you do. And so that was sobering. And a message I try to take back to the parents is, if he's not there, it's probably because he's out making this whole homeschool lifestyle possible for you. So that was a big role. I mean, there's times obviously early on where he was working 2 full-time jobs just to make things work. But as our kids went through the curriculum, I think it's more engaging for dads when they get older to have, those current event topics that come up. How does this intersect? I think the big trend right now is how often men think about the Roman Empire.
I've heard that. And, I did a personal inventory.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the last time
No.
So does that make me?
I don't know.
I don't know.
You should do. I think you have some books about that in here, so you should be fine.
Yeah.
So he's jumped in on the conversation. One of the classical conversations is kind of famous for the little jingles they put all their memory work to. And he thought he'd be funny, and he always would write made up history sentences and write little songs to go with them. And it was his way of just participating, and I would yell at him for messing it up, and it was fun.
Well, that is our role.
Yeah.
That is our role. So you combined kind of full-time homeschooling with multiple children with a working career. How did that begin? And tell us your working journey. Yeah.
So when we joined Classical Conversations, the equipment load was small, but there's tuition for being in our communities. So the first year, again, husband's like all on board, which I think was a small miracle because, again, early on money's tight. But the next year I was like, I'm about ready to go back to him and ask him to fund the next year. And so I was like, I think I'm going to have to be involved and work part-time or something. But, Classical Conversations has ways of, figuring out how to compensate for some of those expenses. And so, the first year, they're like, well, we have a need. We need to open another community. And so I was like, well, I'll do that. It appeared to me that the community leader vacuumed, and that's what I thought. So I signed up not knowing anything more, and I agreed. And then I learned what was actually involved. And so that was great. The next year they needed somebody in state leadership. And so I agreed, and then I found out what it was. But through this process then of homeschooling and then the opportunities I've had to serve other parents, each skill set I have gained mostly has blessed my homeschool because every time you're accountable to something, you're a little bit more engaged, and that carried over into our home. So when people ask, like, how do you do both? It's never easy. We're always trying to figure out the balance. But I know that I'm a better homeschool mom for the responsibilities that I've taken on within the homeschool leadership. So, and with each level of leadership, then there was something else to learn. And so it also, again, as part of my own education as a lifelong learner, I've learned what I'm interested in. And it turns out, like I said, I love history. I love politics, and I love how those things merge. And then I love now, too, how my role in Classical Conversations and all my passions have aligned. And I'm the type of person where if I don't have an outlet for that, I'm not that much fun to be around, actually. So for me to have an outlet to continue growing as a lean learner in my home and modeling what it's like to tackle the next big project, to learn about my what's next, if you will. It also brings like camaraderie to our homeschool, because when we all sit down to figure out what we're doing today, I'm right there along with them, like as a fellow student, and we're all in this together. So one room schoolhouse all the way to the top.
So we met a couple of months ago at the HSLDA National Leaders Conference, and I recall something about numerous animals in your house. What was that about?
Well, it's a new adventure that we're on. So again, when you're studying all these foundational ideas that formed our country, even like private property and how that goes hand in hand with some of the other big ideas. Well, I just kind of wanted to experiment with that kind of a life. So it was something both me and my husband had been curious about. And then when the opportunity presented itself, we recently moved to an acreage and traded our suburb life for something a little bit different. And so we're re-exploring and relearning about what it means to have cow. And we have 3 sheep, 2 goats, chickens, and 6 pigs right now. So
do you have rabbits or cats? Or
we have a million cats, I think.
I think you had like 1 cat per kid or something.
We do right
or
now.
2 cats per kid.
We had like 22 at one point. So they are all finding homes right now.
Are they?
But our mouse population is down. Yeah. So it's working.
So the switch from suburban to rural, how did that come about, and how's that affected?
It was really a philosophical change, and it was just step back and evaluating what we wanted our family culture to be like. And a lot of it has to do with my parents normalized something that was very strange to most people. And so we saw ourselves in the same position to be able to normalize something that seems very strange to our neighbors as well. And we take regular inventory. We ask our kids, you're like, you're good? Is this still better than, what our life was? And I would say the time we spent together outside doing hands-on things together has gone above and beyond what we could expected. Just family projects, family wins. We did that. We built this big high tunnel hoop house, has lots of names. No idea what we were doing, but the 9 of us, we did that. And it's a part of, kind of our identity now that we can tackle that kind of a project. So.
Well, what kind of words of wisdom do you want to pass on to our listening audience based on your lifelong learning experiences and now with a kid heading out into the adult world?
There's actually a representative in Iowa that I admire. And one of the things he said is perfection is the enemy of the good. Mm. And so like most things in life, we're not going to be perfect. And so my twist on that is what things can we normalize for the next generation that they can use as a springboard to take it to the next level and the next level. Your paper was very inspiring about the habits of liberty at the end there, and that's something I've kind of resonated on. And what new habits do we need to teach the next generation that won't be perfect, but will set them up to teach the next generation something even better. So that to normalize the strange things is a good thing to do.
You've said that a number of times as an interesting thought. Where do you think homeschooling fits today? Is it more of a mainstream option, or is it still a thing that people look at a bit askance?
It's very normal, but at the same time, the demographics have changed. And so I think there's always an opportunity for homeschoolers to say, what's my why? Because once it's a bigger thing, we can get kind of lost in the group. And homeschooling is such an individual, personal, intimate decision that you make that there's still that responsibility on each homeschool family to discern what is God's calling for me in this situation with these children, with these, and to make it personal and to chart a course that is best for them.
In your homeschooling experience, it sounds like you've been pretty heavily involved in a community of homeschoolers. How important is that, do you think?
Invaluable. The best part about it is, there's such a good parts, but my favorite part is the adults that are in my children's life. I think that was something, the constant affirmation from them, but at the same time to watch other adults that care about my children and see things in them that sometimes I overlook, good and bad. Sometimes the traits that my kids have that are the same as mine, I'm not as aware to them because, they're me. So their ability to refine them, but also encourage them and point out good things that in growth areas that sometimes when you're so close, you don't see it as much. And that's been a huge blessing.
So I think I said I was going to give you the final word, and then I asked you 2 or 3 more questions. So now you can have your actual final word.
Words.
I mean, I already stole the first one, so now you can come up with a second final word. And if it's really good, I might, ask you for a third final word.
Our motto at Classical Conversations is to know God and to make him known. And that's my favorite part about education is we don't always consider, and this is what I love about classical education too, is that everything that we see and encounter is a revelation of the nature of God by the merits of it's part of his created order. And so there's a lot of things you can get involved in this life, politics, that they're going to have an expiration date. And a lot of them are worthy causes, but education is, if the heart of education is to know our Creator, that is an initiative that doesn't end with this life. And so I think this is one of those timeless things that we can enter into as individuals and as a community that will transcend this life into the next. And I'm so excited to see what education looks beyond this life as well.
Well, that was a really good final word. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Once again, my guest today is Lauren Gideon, and she's the Director of Public Relations and Affairs at Classical Conversation, a homeschooled for many years growing up, and a well-accomplished homeschool mom. It's been really delightful speaking with you today. I love both of your final words. So thank you for being with us today. This has been another episode of Homeschool Talks. Once again, I'm Jim Mason, President of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you've enjoyed this episode, and who wouldn't, please share with your friends. And if you would like to get upcoming podcast episodes delivered right to your very own inbox, sign up for Homeschool Talks email list. Subscribers will receive exclusive content and will be able to submit questions to address on future podcasts. Wow. And if you're not yet a member of HSLDA, we'd love to have you join us. Please go to homeschooltalks.com/join. So thanks again, Lauren.
Thank you.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's Online Academy. When you're homeschooling a high schooler, it can be difficult to stay on top of everything they're learning. The good news is you don't have to do it all on your own. HSLDA Online Academy offers more than 40 live, interactive online courses for grades 7 through 12. To view a list of course offerings, visit academy.hslda.org. That's academy.hslda.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.